Imagine standing on a shore at sunset, staring at a horizon where the sea hides more than it reveals. Out there, Plato once claimed, lay a city of marble and fire. Temples rose like ivory mountains. Towers caught the sun like polished mirrors, and streets shone with a mysterious red-gold metal called Orichalcum, brighter than gold itself. Canals ringed the city in perfect circles, crossed by bridges wide enough for chariots, carrying merchants and priests toward a temple of Poseidon. Inside, bulls were sacrificed, oaths sworn, and at the center loomed a statue of the god, driving 6 winged horses, his eyes burning with ivory and precious stone. This was Atlantis, or at least the Atlantis of Plato. In his dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, written over 2,300 years ago, he described not fantasy, but, he claimed, a memory. A mighty empire beyond the Pillars of Heracles, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. Its dominion stretched wider than Libya and Asia combined. Its ships reached Egypt. Its armies marched against Athens. And then, in a single day and night of misfortune, Atlantis vanished beneath the sea. For centuries, that sentence has haunted us. Was it invention? Many scholars think so. That Atlantis was Plato's parable, a warning about hubris told through the rise and ruin of a city. Yet others point to fragments that make dismissal harder. Sunken ruins off Spain, volcanic eruptions that shattered Minoan Crete, rising seas at the end of the Ice Age that drowned entire coastlines. Each clue feels like a whisper of something real. What fascinates us is not only whether Atlantis existed, but what it symbolizes. If true, it may have been the first great empire, wealthy, advanced, destined for greatness. If false, it still reveals something universal: our longing for a paradise lost, our fear of punishment, our awareness that even the mightiest civilizations can vanish overnight. Rome, Byzantium, the Maya left ruins, chronicles, scars in stone. Atlantis left nothing except words. Yet those words outlived kingdoms, cathedrals, and dynasties. They endure because they speak to a fragile truth, the thin line between triumph and downfall. So tonight, we follow Plato's vision. Atlantis rising from divine favor, dazzling in glory, corroding in pride, and drowning in flood and fire. A city that may never have stood on any map, but which still stands in our minds, a reflection of every empire that thought itself eternal. Plato traced the origins of Atlantis to 9,000 years before Solon, when gods still mingled with mortals. The island, he wrote, was a gift of Poseidon, who loved a mortal woman, Cleito. To protect her, the sea god carved a hill and surrounded it with concentric rings of land and water, fortifications raised by divine hand. At its summit, he crowned a citadel of gleaming stone, the first stronghold of Atlantis. From this union came 10 sons, the first kings. The eldest, Atlas, gave his name to the island. His descendants ruled not only the throne, but also the seas around it. Atlantis, in Plato's vision, was born as no ordinary city. It was an empire with divine roots. Generations later, the Atlanteans raised palaces of red, black, and white stone, quarried from their island. They dug harbors wide enough for hundreds of ships, linked by canals so precise that merchants could sail directly into the heart of the capital. From the citadel, kings presided over 10 provinces, each rich in grain, metals, and livestock, loyal to the central throne. Their resources seemed endless: gold, silver, ivory, and the mysterious orichalcum, said to glow like fire. The plains yielded 2 harvests a year. Rivers fed gardens and vineyards, and elephants wandered their forests. Surrounded by abundance, Atlantis appeared destined not only to thrive, but to conquer. But was Plato inventing or preserving memory? To some, Atlantis was a parable, a mirror held to Athens, a warning that pride destroys empires. Yet others glimpse echoes of real civilizations. The Minoans of Crete, 1,000 years earlier, built dazzling palaces and commanded the Aegean, until fire and sea from Thera's eruption shattered their world. Survivors may have whispered fragments of that disaster, later woven into Plato's tale. Geologists add another layer. At the end of the Ice Age, rising seas drowned fertile coasts, erasing villages and plains. Perhaps Atlantis was not one city, but a collage of many lands lost to water. What matters most is not the archaeology, but the idea. Plato painted Atlantis as the first true empire of the seas. Wealthy, ambitious, glittering beyond imagination. It was the archetype of power, rising swiftly, born of gods and crowned with gold. Yet within its rise lay its shadow. The brilliance of Atlantis dazzled, but its hunger grew. From the start, the seeds of its fall were already sown. Plato's vision of Atlantis at its height was dazzling, a city so rich it seemed almost unreal. At the center lay its capital, encircled by 3 perfect rings of land and sea. Bridges arched over canals, towers glittered, and walls gleamed with metal. The outer ramparts were coated in bronze, the inner in tin, and at the core, the citadel blazed with orichalcum, a mysterious alloy that shone like fire beneath the sun. At the heart stood a temple to Poseidon, the god who had given Atlantis its beginning. Larger than any hall in Greece, its roof shimmered with silver, its pinnacles capped with gold. Inside towered a colossal statue of Poseidon, driving 6 winged horses, carved from ivory and clad in orichalcum. Around the temple, sacred bulls grazed, kept for rituals where kings swore oaths before judgment or war. Religion and power fused here. The Atlanteans believed their empire carried divine blessing. Wealth poured in from every direction. The plains produced 2 harvests each year, fed by rivers channeled into reservoirs. Mountains yielded timber, stone, and metals in abundance. Horses thundered across meadows, elephants roamed in forests, and ships brought amber, ivory, and spices from beyond familiar seas. To Plato, Atlantis was not merely fertile. It was inexhaustible, a paradise where nature itself seemed eager to serve. Power matched prosperity. The Atlantean fleet was said to number 1,000 ships, greater than all the navies of Greece combined. Their armies, clad in bronze and gold, stretched across Europe and Africa, seizing kingdoms, demanding tribute, enforcing their dominion. Only Athens, in Plato's account, resisted and held its ground. To the rest of the world, Atlantis was overwhelming, an empire that seemed destined. Yet beneath the myth, there are echoes of real civilizations. The Minoans built palaces with flowing water and frescoes of sea life, their fleets dominating the Aegean. The Egyptians raised golden temples beside the Nile. The Phoenicians sailed into the Atlantic, chasing trade across unknown horizons. Atlantis, whether invention or memory, was a mirror of all these triumphs combined into one dazzling image. But Plato's story does not stop at wonder. He hints that the Atlanteans, once noble, grew restless. Their wealth no longer satisfied, their conquests no longer seemed enough. Power that had once bound them together began to corrupt, feeding arrogance and hunger. The empire that glittered like paradise was already trembling beneath the weight of its own pride. Atlantis was magnificent, yes, but in that very magnificence lay the seed of its undoing. Atlantis, as Plato tells it, did not collapse from poverty or invasion. It drowned in its own triumph. The kings, once descendants of Poseidon who ruled with balance, began to confuse blessing with entitlement. Prosperity no longer bred gratitude, it bred arrogance. Gold, silver, and orichalcum, once reserved for temples, now lined banquet halls, jewelry, and weapons. Feasts became endless, festivals more lavish, sacrifices less about devotion than display. The king swore oaths to Poseidon, but forgot the humility those rituals demanded. Their palaces, plated with precious metals, stood as monuments not to piety, but to pride. Plato wrote simply, they were no longer able to bear their prosperity with moderation. That was the turning point. Armies that had once defended the island became instruments of conquest. Atlantis turned outward, demanding tribute from distant lands, enslaving nations, stripping temples of wealth. They no longer sought harmony, they sought dominion. To outsiders, the Atlanteans seemed invincible. Their ships blackened horizons, their armies crushed resistance. Yet within, the empire hollowed. Nobles grew greedy, dissenters silenced, and power concentrated in hands that cared more for conquest than stewardship. Pride made them believe even the gods could not restrain them. Here Plato's myth brushes uncomfortably close to history. Athens, in its imperial age, taxed its allies into resentment. Rome, at its peak, drowned in decadence. The Minoans, too, may have overreached, building palaces whose complexity masked fragility. Atlantis, real or imagined, carried the same curse, success eroding discipline. Plato adds another layer, one almost mystical. He says the divine portion within the Atlanteans weakened. At first, they were part god, part mortal, strong in both spirit and flesh. But as generations passed, the mortal outweighed the divine. In modern terms, it's less about blood than about virtue, the qualities that had once given them greatness. Restraint, balance, humility faded into greed, arrogance, and corruption. Athens, he claimed, was chosen as the corrective. Poorer, simpler, yet stronger in discipline, the Athenians resisted Atlantean expansion. In his telling, Athens stood not just as an enemy, but as a mirror. Everything Atlantis had lost, Athens still possessed. Their victory was brief but symbolic, a reminder that simplicity and virtue could, for a moment, overcome wealth and arrogance. Still, the true enemy of Atlantis was never Athens. It was Atlantis itself. By the time storms and earthquakes came, The empire was already drowning. Its spirit corrupted, its foundations cracked. The parable is clear. Civilizations do not only fall when enemies batter their gates. They fall when wealth blinds them, when ambition hardens into hubris, when they mistake glitter for strength. Atlantis, in Plato's story, was already sinking long before the sea rose. Plato closes the tale of Atlantis with a single devastating line. In a single day and night of misfortune, the island of Atlantis disappeared into the depths of the sea. No slow decline, no drawn-out siege, just sudden ruin. Thunder, fire, waves. The picture is apocalyptic. Earthquakes split the ground, mountains shook, and the sea surged inward. Harbors that once bustled with ships were swallowed whole. Temples toppled. The famous concentric channels filled not with sails, but with ash, mud, and wreckage. Fields that had yielded 2 harvests a year vanished beneath salt and water. Within hours, a mighty empire was gone. Consider Thera, modern Santorini. Around 1600 BC, its volcano erupted with force greater than Krakatoa. Ash darkened the skies, and tsunamis struck Crete, crippling the Minoan civilization. At Akrotiri, archaeologists uncovered frescoes and streets sealed in ash, an ancient world frozen at the moment of destruction. Could this disaster, retold across centuries, have seeded Plato's Atlantis? Or think of the end of the Ice Age. As glaciers melted, seas rose over 100 meters, drowning fertile plains and coastal villages. Around 5600 BC, the Mediterranean surged into the Black Sea, flooding settlements in what must have felt like the drowning of the world. Survivors did not leave charts or data, but stories, tales of gods unleashing the sea. What makes Atlantis haunting is its speed. Rome crumbled over centuries, Egypt over millennia, Byzantium over 1,000 years. Atlantis, by contrast, was paradise at dusk and silence by dawn. That suddenness gave the myth its enduring power. Plato's audience in Athens would have heard the moral clearly. No wall, no fleet, no wealth can withstand earth and sea once arrogance has provoked them. Atlantis, rich beyond measure, strong beyond challenge, was erased in a breath, and so the story lived on. Explorers searched, poets reimagined, scientists debated, yet its essence remained. The vision of a glittering world undone in an instant, a civilization drowned before dawn. Atlantis, whether history or parable, still whispers its warning that no empire is beyond collapse, and that sometimes the end does not creep forward, but crashes in a single night of fire and waves. Atlantis may have drowned in a single night, but its shadow has stretched across millennia. Few tales have clung so tightly to the human imagination. Dismissed by scholars, doubted by skeptics, it still rises again and again, because Atlantis is more than a place. It is a mirror. For explorers, it became a compass pointing to the unknown. Renaissance sailors penciled "Here lies Atlantis" onto maps where oceans turned blank. Adventurers searched the marshes of Spain, the jungles of the Caribbean, even the frozen wastes of Antarctica, hoping to find the lost city. They never did, but their searching spoke of something deeper, our hunger to believe there was once a paradise now hidden, waiting to be uncovered. For philosophers, it was a warning. Plato never praised Atlantis, he condemned it. In his telling, wealth bred arrogance. Arrogance called down ruin, and the sea took all. That pattern has echoed through history. Rome dazzled, then decayed. Byzantium glittered, then fractured. The Maya rose, then collapsed into silence. Atlantis, whether real or not, became their ghostly forerunner, the first story of a civilization undone by its own pride. For artists and dreamers, it was a canvas. Francis Bacon reimagined Atlantis as a beacon of science. Enlightenment thinkers saw it as a rational utopia, and modern storytellers cast it in novels, films, and games as both paradise and warning. Every generation has reshaped the myth to reflect its own desires, sometimes hope, sometimes fear, always fascination. Even science owes it a debt. In Chasing Atlantis, archaeologists rediscovered the Minoans of Crete, the eruption of Santorini, the drowned coastlines of our Ice Age past. The search for myth unearthed real history. But perhaps its deepest legacy lies not in maps or ruins, but in memory. Atlantis endures because it embodies the questions every empire must face. How long can greatness last? What happens when pride outweighs wisdom? What force, natural or human, will finally bring the walls down? Atlantis may never have stood on any shore, but it stands in us, as dream, as warning, as reflection. A city that believed itself eternal, erased in a single night. And perhaps that is why it refuses to sink. Because when we whisper of Atlantis, we are never only speaking of a city drowned. We are speaking of ourselves.